is that we are attempting to define a sequential series of structures that make up a part of a bigger structure, the bigger structure being the dissemination machine, the smaller parts being entry points in which particular elements of that may be utilized, and that particular structure may be our opportunity when the EMSC program and activities within the EMSC program don't need the whole machine. So as an example, if a product is defined and finalized, and let's say that product is around mental health, and all that's necessary in the minds of the group that is working on the mental health product is website access, then providing a timely, effective, and efficient strategy to get to the website access, to get it posted quickly, and to be able to build analytics around it would be all that that particular group may find necessary. In contrast, if a particular group of stakeholders that fit within the persona of our 4 targeted areas, patients and families, EMSC stakeholders, advocates, and the scientific community, is all that you're trying to access to get scientific information out. So let's say PCARN wants to reach out to pre-hospital personnel, then engaging that part of the machinery to say, I don't need everything else that goes along. I need an efficient way to get to infographics for pre-hospital personnel. Then getting that structure in place is part of our strategy. So the 2 strategies go hand in hand. One of them is obviously far more comprehensive. That's providing the entire machine, but providing parts of the infrastructures for each of the elements, each of the sequenced areas, is also as important. I think that as I look back at the progress that we're making and the concerns and questions that people had, I feel like perhaps we're not getting some of the machinery pieces in place fast enough to be able to meet some goals. And I think probably the key area that we'd like to focus on is that related to social media, and it really ekes over into branding and perhaps touches upon a little bit of our protocol work. And so because it is so cross-cutting, I thought we could spend a little more time focusing on this particular issue. So I'm going to take a pause there and, first of all, see if there are any questions or any concerns, and really garner your feedback for does the alignment make sense? Does the original question that we were asking and the structure that we took to provide development of the pediatric toolkit as an example of how the entire machine works and the importance of building in each of the structures to tap into them when necessary also makes sense. Are there questions about that? And I really would love your feedback because I want to make sure that we're messaging both those strategies effectively. Okay, so not to put anybody on
Charles,
the spot.
Rachel.
Go ahead.
So are you hearing, I mean, I know we're hearing a little bit from PCARN about moving forward with different social media groups, but are you hearing this as well at a kind of a grassroots level from other EMSC groups or the social media stuff?
Well, I think for transparency, I think I'm hearing it mostly from the research community.
Okay.
So to answer your question, yeah, in fact, I think what I'm really hearing from the other side is a lot of positive feedback about the expansive stakeholder groups that we're trying to engage and the alignment across all of those so that nobody is really lost within the space. So, you know, 2 levels of communication and sadly, and thank you for calling me out on this, Rachel, because working in the world of quality, I spend so much time looking critically at the gaps that we have and not enough time celebrating success. and I really shouldn't do that. I think the group has been amazing about addressing the entire spectrum, and we've heard a lot of positive feedback specifically about engaging the pre-hospital community, engaging families, and engaging community providers and not just pediatric emergency medicine clinicians.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so with that in mind, I thought as we build this mechanism, and to Rachel's point, one of those time benchmarks and timelines that we were looking at, actually, it wasn't her point, it was embedded in her question about the deliverables that we wanted to help support our colleagues in PCARN with, is that I think the machine that is most valuable, I think the entry point to a machine that is most valuable for PCARN is this matrix that I'm showing, and it includes our stakeholders, patients and families, and you'll see where I included the 4 stakeholders, the 4 personas, up at the top and built some categories around them. So my first stopping point for validating this is I've separated out patients and families to the patient and the family to say for any disease process or any process that we plug into this that we want this machine to be engaged with, are we addressing the needs of the patient and are we addressing the needs of the family? I left all EMSC stakeholders as a single persona, but I'm certainly willing to break that down. It's really this group's decision. And then for advocates, I separated out legislators and family advocates and giving the example of the Family Advisory Network. And for the scientific community, I've split that up into pre-hospital personnel, hospital-based clinicians. I didn't separate community-based and PDM physicians, mostly because the feedback that we initially received is we really don't need to target PDM physicians as much as we need to target the community. And I think the work that TREC has done has best exemplified that. And then a third column in the scientific community to include researchers. You'll notice I left clinicians broad so that we speak to the multidisciplinary and multi-level of training engagement, so that's not confining. So my first question, given that we had come to agreement on those 4 personas, is there any clustering of what I laid out that needs to occur, or is there any further separation to include other groups because the modalities that we're going to use for social media and the vehicles for communication need to be separated out even more?
Charles, this is Mark Cicero. One idea to consider as either a separate persona woven into the personas or just a topic to keep in mind that's a big piece of the toolkit we're going to use is whether to include educators, educators for families, educators for advocates, educators for all the sub-columns of the scientific community, whether that's useful in framing this. I'm not sure that it is, but I think that education and educators are part of this mix.
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Mark. I am going to put these elements right on the discussion for consideration, so sort of a parking lot. My immediate reaction is really referring to your point in how, as you were describing how cross-cutting it was across all of these. Is it really separate, or do we somehow figure out another way to take sort of a 2-dimensional matrix and create a 3rd dimension to it that includes all these cross-cutting elements, sort of like decision support? So let me leave that on for now in the parking lot, and we'll continue to add elements to that. Any other thoughts?
Charles, yes, Jocelyn. I'm just, again, same kind of thought, but wondering if we need to break out specifically general pediatricians. I don't know.
That's okay.
I don't know.
Dr. Macias, this is Julie Johnston. Where is the community? Is that an EMSC stakeholder, or does it go under advocates? If we're going to educate the general public and community members, they're not necessarily advocates. They could be. We could turn them into advocates for children, but do they have a place separate?
So I think that's a great question. I had put patients and families in there, and conceptually, I had anticipated, as hearing the discussions that had occurred at our in-person meeting, that they were not just patients and families as they encountered the continuum of care, but they were ones that could be the potential families. So like sort of the awareness that people have of the CDC. You hope that you're never going to need their knowledge, but you're going to somehow encounter anything that they have done. And that sort of anticipatory inclusion, maybe the best thing to do is to call this family and community.
So in my mind, families are, caregivers, and community are groups that interact with children. So these could be in the education system. It could be, scouting, sports, that kind of thing, churches, those kinds of folks who interact with children, but who would need some pediatric emergency education. We would hope our social media things would be, we could bring that to them, and educate them, but they're not exactly caregivers. You see what I'm saying? As a family member would be.
So I separated them out to list community, patient, and family to address that. And to the point that may have a different look, I completely get it. I would imagine that an infographic or a just-in-time video would have a different theme for when it's personal with a family or patient versus when it may be something I should anticipate. So I think this structure would address that. Okay, any other thoughts with this particular cluster and the way that we've subdivided it? All right. In that case, I will move on. So I picked, based on the conversations that we had, the mechanisms listed here: infographics, just-in-time video, podcast, web page hosting, Twitter, newsletters. Am I missing any big leverage points or vehicles that we have discussed before we start breaking these down? And I mean just big sweeping elements. Okay, with that being said, then I'm going to start, and mostly because I'm getting older, I'm going to have to grow this in size here. All right, I'm going to start with infographics. So from what I heard Julie just say, she really sees this community infographic as being sort of a different infographic than that for the patient and family. I'm going to put the patient in question because we certainly could address infographics about a disease process in a separate way than we do for family, but the question is it always going to be the case, or is it really going to depend on the disease process? So for now, I was just going to leave that as a question mark. I am filling that in with who actually does that work. who actually generates that, who is the target. And so I would imagine that that's an EIC program manager or project manager that would be accomplishing that. And that's informed by the work of that dissemination subgroup. And we have an infographics, protocols and infographics subgroup included. Does the rest of this populate correctly? Are there boxes that we should block out because infographics don't pertain to that population? Okay. Then I'll move to just-in-time videos. So if we are developing a just-in-time video, what is the correct mechanism so first of all, do we want to develop just-in-time videos for disease process? And, I think it's fine for us to take the discussions that the protocol group had with seizure management and use that as a case example to help us think through that. So status epilepticus, pre-hospital, hospital-based, otherwise, is there value to the community in knowing the management of status epilepticus? Is that something we want public awareness of?
Charles, I think if it's Brad. In terms of a video that people view online, lots of sites know that videos drive traffic, but unless you're a YouTube content creator, a YouTuber, which is apparently a valid career, a lot of folks don't want to watch a long video. And so in terms of, if you had to fix your sink, you'd want to search for the one video that teaches you how to fix your sink and doesn't give you a lot of, fluff around it. So I think if you're trying to deliver a specific point, a specific skill, something that is like quick and focused, that is definitely the main role of just-in-time video. If it's like a sweeping 20-minute video, all surrounding the management of status epilepticus in the pre-hospital setting, people may pay it heed, but they probably won't watch the entire video just because it doesn't really meet their needs in a way that something else can, whether that's an algorithm, an infographic, a flow chart, something they can like look at and consume quicker. But think of the just-in-time video like a how-to video. And people want it short, sweet, clearly lay out the steps, and tells them one thing and tells them how to do it right, and gets them, in and out of that video view as quick as possible, and can be viewed on a number of different devices. So the shortness of the video plays a role as well.
So Brad, a few things that I heard in your comments. One of them implied in that is that it is of value to the community as long as it's in the right format and the right length with the right content. You also mentioned YouTube, and one of the questions that we had really explored at our in-person meeting back in about a month ago was related to whether we are curators or developers, and we really are trying to be 99% curators and not developers. So who or what is the right place to find this? Is this really searching existing videos?
There, honestly, when it comes to the landscape of medical training videos, it's so weird and wild out there. Like the New England Journal, they have branded videos that they do. There's other sites that do branded videos. Kind of the overall scope of medical education focused videos, whether that's like clinician leaning or parent leading, is really broad and wide. Everything from like commercialized entities to things linked to, magazines, to individual creators. And if you want EMSC to be, kind of the CDC of pre-hospital care, it's going to be a hard search to find perfect, high-quality things for every topic that you want to hit. That's
okay.
Because there's just so much out there, and whether or not any of it's good, for blog posts and podcasts, there has been some work done on quality indicators and how that relates to the Gestalt and how to create quality content. But for medical education videos, there isn't. There's not been even a scoping review or any sort of investigation into, what makes a good, med ed teaching video. And so it's the Wild West.
So is it fair to say? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. Just one thing I was going to say about the videos. Videos a little bit tricky. We have experimented with the idea of videos before. We created a whole bunch of discharge videos, and as I said, we made them 2 minutes. We storyboarded it ourselves. We created all the content ourselves because there's really nothing out there for it. The challenge with the video is that to create that, it's hard to modify. It is what it is. It works really well, I think, for the patient education, but develop them is so expensive and time-consuming, and it will be one of those situations where it has some benefit, but we have to consider the resources and the time that it would take to develop. So we have this 114 videos right now that we did in English and in Spanish. We made sure that the reading level was in the 6th grade reading level. We put analytics on it, and we tried 2 different things. One was a provider-prescribed videos, meaning that I choose which 2-3 videos you should watch related to your medical problem. And we also looked at it from the standpoint of a YouTube library of videos that was made accessible to the patients for the patient to choose. A couple of things we found out is that the time that people spend watching the videos on average was 1 minute and like 10 seconds. So anything more than 2 minutes was not going to be something that people had the attention span for. The other thing we learned is that when we make it accessible for them to watch a video throughout a library of videos, they usually just choose one, and it's not necessarily the best one. But if we gave them a prescription saying, okay, these are the 2 videos I want you to watch, they tend to be more likely to watch both. But the downside to that is that we will have to then manage it and decide who watches what, and just for the patient education makes more sense. We're talking about educational videos for, let's say, community providers. That is completely different because that's going to be learning for them. And my question on all of this was, how does the social media aspect of this going to work? Are we going to have a community where somebody goes to and accesses everything? There's a chat group. There's Twitters coming out of it. Or, for example, how does the video get housed in the grand scheme of this social media piece as we're talking?
Well, we envision that many of these things would be hyperlinked, but they would be housed, and that's actually down in web page hosting via some common platform on the EIC website. But I think that is a discussion that we are going to put over here.
Sorry, by the way, I'm on the phone, so I can't see it. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I put it in the parking lot.
Yeah, I'll give one more example before we move on from the video. So, we've all had patients that have clear croup, they've got stridor, and a pre-hospital provider has given them albuterol because they just wanted to do something, or they didn't know, or they thought it was a wheeze. So a good example of a quick educational video for a pre-hospital provider would be, what is stridor? Knowing what it sounds like, knowing what it looks like, and what to be concerned about, and don't give them albuterol. If your goal is what stridor is and you don't give it albuterol, that can be done in a minute to a minute and a half. That data about the cutting off of the video in a minute and 10 seconds, of course, it's obviously true. People don't love the long form anymore.
This is Rachel. Does anybody know what happened to Garth Meckler's videos? Because I think he might have had some of that, and they were really short. I think that was he had a TI grant for that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
I don't. But we can certainly explore that.
Who were you asking about? This is Diane. I couldn't hear the name.
Garth Meckler.
That name sounds familiar. I can check.
Yeah, I think he's at Portland now.
Yeah, out of OSU.
He has moved on. This is Mark Cicero. Garth is currently the chief of pediatric emergency medicine at BC Children's in Vancouver. Great collaborative guy, and I think you're right. You're right on, Rachel, in that he did a lot of short educational pieces and did a lot of outreach to rural and high desert EMS providers. So if we reach out to him, I think he'd be willing to share what he has.
Okay, perfect. All right, so before we move on, actually, we are going to move on to the patient-family piece. So what I heard from this past discussion is that, because there was constant reference to framing it around patient-family, that patient-family videos are valuable. They have to have the right content. What I didn't hear was that there was value in separating the two. And one of the issues that has come up is videos that are addressing specific content for patients, maybe sending a separate message to family. If family and patient walks away hearing 5 to 10%, and it's a different 5 to 10%. So is it reasonable to say that a single video, just-in-time video strategy for patients and families is more reasonable than separating the two?
Charles, hi, it's Joss. We've talked a little bit about this on the social media subcommittee, and I'm wondering if that is a decision that we can ultimately end up making once we decide if we're going to use an outside contractor who specializes in reaching exactly, the population that we're trying to reach, because I don't know the answer to that. Do we look at it, do we lump them together, or do we separate it out? I don't know. And I would want advice from someone who's had to do this before.
Okay.
Just a question.
I can say for our patient experience, the ones that we did, we were doing out in DC, we basically had one video that was meant for the patient and all their caregivers. What we did is that we were delivering a link to the video that was housed in the YouTube channel to the email address of the person who was the guardian or caregiver, and we were allowing multiple email addresses. So if there are multiple people taking care of the patient, for example, a family where mom and dad are separated or divorced and the child will go back and forth between the two households, then we were allowing the two email addresses. And when we moved to the text messaging, we did the same thing. We were allowing multiple phone numbers. But to create these videos, I think one video should be sufficient and should be comprehensive enough to be used by a patient and their family. And what we said in those videos, at the end of the video, we said this video was for your child only, and it is not meant to be used to like a neighbor or family member or somebody else who might not have been evaluated in the ED. So we made clear that this video was given to this patient because of this specific diagnosis that was made in this child. But other than that, we were allowing every caregiver of the child to have access. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. It really does help a lot. And is it fair to apply the same box to the to podcasts? Because the just-in-time video may look very different than a podcast, or are we saying that families and patients don't really want podcasts? They don't want a 25-minute session on disease management, or 15-minute session, or even 10 minutes. And Brad, I'm gonna pick on you here for a second. Having listened to many of your podcasts, they feel very directed at the clinician, which I love. My question is, does it have the same appeal to a patient's family if it were tailored differently, or do they just not have the attention span to do that?
it really depends. I mean, there is an appetite for podcast content that is well produced and that is a half hour long or an hour long. Any listeners to Radio Lab on the call?
This is Juliet. Yeah.
Definitely.
Right. So that is layperson focused. But
What's
it's
it called?
Radio Lab, RADIOLAB. Used to be out of WNYC in New York, and now it's kind of its own thing. But it's incredibly well produced and well researched, and it leans towards science, and it's very engaging and educational, and it's a mix of audio editing and interviews and live content. There's absolutely an appetite out there for it. The major formats of podcast are that at least would be reasonable for this kind of delivery would be an interview, which is a short, sweet discussion with somebody about a topic. But for it to be interesting, the person that is being interviewed either has to be well known or they have to be easily identified as an expert in something that is valuable to the listener, if that makes sense. Right.
Yes.
So if you didn't know the person who makes the best paper airplanes in the world, that's still a topic that's like, oh, well, that's neat. He makes the best paper airplanes in the world. And if his name is John Krasowski and he's some dude from Poland, that's fine. But the topic itself is interesting, and most of the families and patients listening to these won't know the name of the person who's being interviewed, so the topic has to be really their focused. If you were to produce something that was topic focused,
what about if this was something where the interviewee was another patient or a family who has the same medical issue or a similar kind of a thing, would also resonate?
You were like 15 seconds of where I was going, right? So the other part of it is it has to have a vested interest. So if it's a story, if it's a story that teaches, if it's educational, right? EMS providers carrying EpiPens. And if there's an EMS provider in a family and you intercut their testimonials like, I am so glad I had an EpiPen in my ambulance. Jimmy was at camp and he smelled a peanut and his skin turned into a hive, and we gave him an EpiPen, and it took us an hour to get to the hospital, and it was great that we had it. That story turns into a little bit of an advocacy piece, if that makes sense. I know it's a relatively simplistic example. You'd have to really research it out well, but I think the interview format and then the using a real world story to either A, teach, and or B, advocate for something to happen. I think those are easy enough to do from a production standpoint that you don't. The Radio Lab episodes, it takes them months to put these together, right? So they're really, really well done. James and I, for instance, when we did the interview with Brent, it took us about a couple weeks to filter the questions and schedule things and make sure the audio recording was going to work well. But it was relatively straightforward and didn't take too much time to get it going, knowing that we had somebody on the other end of the line that was a subject matter expert.
Okay. So
can I jump in? This is Melissa. I'm one of the other family advisors on this group, and just wanting to kind of keep this going as patient, family, community, they all have preferences. So some are going to, like the video. Some are going to like a podcast. Some are going to so we're not going to be able to say, is this avenue best for patients and families? So I think every single patient, family, and almost every single person we're trying to reach gets their information in various forms. So keeping that in mind.
No, I think that's a really important point, that we're not going to have a single solution and that there is heterogeneity within each group. We'll just have to consider that as we hit each topic. What about
it's gotta be topic focused? Yeah, you have to choose the best modality for each topic instead of making every single one for every single topic.
Absolutely. What about EMSC stakeholders? Is a just-in-time video really right for a targeted issues grantee versus a PCARN grantee versus an EIC grantee versus a federal partner? Or is it reasonable to say the infographic is sufficient? That particular stakeholder is already engaged in that work and doesn't necessarily need a video. They can always default to the patient family video or that's created for the scientific community. I'm willing to hear a contrary opinion. It was just something I heard somebody say that gave me a moment to pause and say, perhaps we're wasting a resource if we're trying to target something to other EMSC stakeholders.
I mean, they might be someone who would be good at vetting a video, you know, if used for another purpose or another persona.
Okay.
I would just say that the videos, again, is a time commitment, is a big investment. A lot of time to storyboard, editing, you know, the people are talking about it's a production, and it's not an easy undertaking.
Okay.
And if we were going to do that for every, so let's say you want to have a just-in-time video that encompasses every little part of this, every stakeholder. That's great because it looks more uniform and you have one to address each one of the stakeholders. But I think realistically, in terms of the production time and the cost, it might be difficult to justify a grand scale. We would have to probably use videos as one of the many resources and for the most useful or the most high impact scenarios.
Okay.
So this is Rachel. I really like the videos that we're seeing now from some of the medical journals that are out there. They're only a few minutes long, and they capture the essence of the article and the science. And you know, I think that's something that we can use and not recreate, at least for some of the scientific articles. And
is that, so to your point, is that for pediatricians, hospital clinicians, and researchers? Does that also include pre-hospital personnel, or are they directed differently in pre-hospital?
They're directed, I don't know, I think they're really directed towards medical providers. I'm not sure about, I'm thinking about Julie Leonard's C-Spine, most recent one, and I think I just have to look and see. But definitely, I'm not sure.
So I'm going to give you a case example because I just recently viewed the podcast that we did that EIC did with Lynn Babcock and Kathy Brown on pre-hospital sepsis, and the content was so vastly different than what other sepsis videos were for pediatricians and hospital clinicians and even for researchers that I would say, and I'll just give you the example, much of it was just focused on parameters of recognition that related to what is likely that a pre-hospital provider would actually see. And so the examples there being respiratory rate, altered mental status. Perfusion wasn't even one of them, and the discussion around perfusion was great if you can get it, it should be, but it's rarely recognized or rarely uniformly collected in data. And so I really love the way they caged this to, as a pre-hospital provider, here's what you need to be looking at that may be different in the hospital setting. So in my mind, I think this is different than this group. If you're looking, it's pre-hospital personnel versus pediatricians, hospital clinicians, and researchers. But I'm certainly willing to separate those out or whatever the group wants to do. But to Rachel's point, those brief descriptions, and I really do like that as well, Rachel. I have found that a very entertaining, and for somebody like me who's got a little bit of ADHD, it keeps me focused when I can actually watch them talk and present very briefly.
This is Melissa again. One quick question. Are any of these videos, just-in-time videos, would be like for CE credits or no?
Probably not. I think they're too short, but that I'm going to defer to the experts because I don't think the just-in-time videos would, but I'm thinking the podcast might be. But I worry that we would that we may lose out on our potential audience if we make them long enough to be for credit. But what does the rest of the group think?
This is Jason Woods. I'd love to just weigh in briefly on that. I am not sure that that is a useful goal for the majority of these resources based on length. People say they want CE credits for a lot of things, but only a very small minority of people actually go through the hoops of obtaining them. And so I think that is that's probably too much of a split in what our mission is to have it be an early focus.
Yeah, and I think CE credits are easier if that's the way we want to go than actually CMEs. The physician CMEs are much harder to pull off than nursing CEs.
Okay, that's helpful.
This is Diane Pokey. I think it's good to have it, though, in our back pocket, and particularly if it's something we want to attract people to. So I wouldn't rule it out for everything. It just may be more relevant to use for some things than others.
Okay. Perfect. That leaves us with legislators and family advocates. Is the family advocate group the same video that we create for community? So think of the specific family advocate group most closely tied to the EMSC program being the Family Advisory Network. We have great communication with them, but we also engage with a number of disease-specific family networks, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. We also deal with a hemophilia group.
This is Melissa jumping in again. For this group, being a family advocate and looking at kind of our legislators, it's different than the family sort of educational content that I think we're thinking for the first bucket. So what I think we need here is hard facts if we're going to try to promote or do anything for this issue to gain attention. So we actually do look for data. We do look for things that, how prevalent is this? So I think we are looking for kind of in a layman's terms, but we are looking for numbers. So I think it's different than bucket number one.
This is Julie. I agree that your family advocates are the face of your issue or organization to policymakers. May not just be legislators. It could be Department of Health policymakers within states. And then also they will be a source for our community advocacy. Again, bringing that issue and doing that educational piece in the community and accessing those community networks to address issues. There will also be a source for your lived experience story that you're going to include in your videos and podcasts.
So is it really, so going back to Mo's comment about the investment in the development of videos, is it really saying that what we need is either to eliminate the just-in-time video or to keep the video, but always partner it with a beginning of it that has hard facts in it? So maybe saying, don't use the video without the infographic, don't use the infographic without a background given in the video.
I think numbers and video. And I'm almost thinking that this group, I'm not sure would benefit from a video. I think it's infographics. I think it's quick, I'm thinking elevator speech in these things.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to show a video to a policymaker. We're going to bring a person with a lived experience to make that impact.
This is very helpful. Okay. So we have accomplished 2 rows here. I am going to because this is really important to executing an implementation strategy. And we want to have an implementation strategy to go back to the social media group to really define the exact venues, the exact vendors, and the exact requests of any contractors. I've put examples of EMPulse and Allium in all the scientific community groups. I don't have a target here for the patient family development piece. Who does these groups other than Radiolab?
For family development, is that the question?
Yeah.
Who accesses families? Well, Mike Patrick, we have as part of our group with PediaCast. His podcast is focused towards families.
I mean, who is, I couldn't hear, I'm sorry.
Oh, Mike Patrick, who was at our meeting in, over the last couple, or whenever it was that we met, sorry, I can't remember now.
Oh, yeah.
He's
It's
from
Dr.
Nation,
Mike.
He's part of our department. Yeah.
Mike was there, and his podcast is focused towards families. And we have a podcast here at UC Davis called Kids Considered that's focused towards families also.
Kid Consider?
Kids Considered, like all things considered.
Ah.
But we have Mike Patrick already as part of our group, so I think he would be a great resource.
Okay. So I do apologize if some of this is a little duplicative. We just needed to get a wider audience engagement and make certain that we were all coming to the right strategy. I feel like having accomplished 2 of these rows and being able to say these details will give the social media group a lot of hopefully support for where they're headed. And our goal would be to really complete this in the next 3 weeks or so that we can reach out to our contractors, aggregate all of these use seizures and status epilepticus as an example. And I think we were going to hear a little bit about that report from Terry Fisher regarding protocols and infographics, but the concern of the group was that if we try to do and wait for the critically ill neonate and the risk of sepsis, that this may take too long to develop the first toolkit. We can continue to do that work. We will have that discussion with all our partners engaged in this. But for the quick wins, we're going to focus on the seizure part while concurrently working with our staff at the EIC on the other pieces related to neonatal sepsis, the febrile infant, and all of that discussion, but hoping to partner with TREC. We're going back and forth with a few comments related to that. But I think this will give us broader engagement and allow the social media group to be able to hone in on the specifics so that we can take this to contracting, budgeting, and forecasting in the next 3 to 4 weeks and come up with a comprehensive plan. And ideally, would love to have this comprehensive build for vetting at PCARN. When is the in-person meeting? Is that February, Rachel, or my
Yeah, it's February, I want to say 2nd, 3rd, 4th.
Beginning of February 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, I think, 5th.
Okay, so that if in 6 weeks or so, let's see, what is today, the 18th of November. So I'd say in 7 weeks, if we could comprehensively piece this together with pricing, everything else that's going into it, demonstrate in a very high-level, illustrated, iconic approach to how do you get any pieces of the machine, what do you get when you enter into any of these points, and how do we use this for PCARN studies. I'd love for PCARN to vet this in their leadership in January and push it to the bigger group after getting their feedback in February, while we're concurrently working on the toolkit for seizures, which I think we can do. To that end, I have, we reached out to Corey Chupatazzi. Corey, are you on the call?
I don't show her on the call, yeah.
Okay, so Corey will be coming on, she's already on the EIC staff. She's a pediatric emergency medicine physician. I think you probably all met her. She definitely was joining us virtually at our in-person meeting. She has a master's in clinical research with a focus on dissemination and the knowledge translation piece. And we are going to be upping her time, and she will be partnering with me on this so that we can accelerate our roadmap and really hopefully hit our targets on time as originally planned. So we're excited that she's going to be coming on to do this. But for Julia, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
That was your comment. Okay, good. Does this help the social media group? Is this getting to the crux of the ask to design this machine for people who want to use social media? Because I think it's not just pertinent to PCARN, it's also pertinent to some of the work that we're wanting to do through our quality improvement collaboratives. And using this machine, I think, would be very helpful. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the right person to speak for the whole group, but I think it is good to hear everybody's overall ideas. Our thought when we met was this is such a large machine and has so many asks and such a varied audience that we felt it was best to pull in a contractor. So I think Cassidy was talking with other groups and seeing if we could get somebody that could help spend the time and help organize us and focus our efforts so that we were more effective with this whole thing, because it is really big with a lot of moving parts.
I agree. I think the purpose of moving through this is to really determine, only because in my administrative world I deal with a lot of contractors, is to really determine the ask that we would have for a contractor to say, we need you for these things, but we really don't need you for this. For example, we're not going to ask you whether you need the EMSC stakeholder or not, because we realize that you're not an expert in the EMSC stakeholder. You are an expert in the dissemination piece, but we don't feel we need that as part of the contract. But here's where we need your focus, and here are the places and the people to go to. So I think that they're twofold. We can create the first iteration of this likely on our own, but I think that, to your point, iterative improvement in this and expanding to meet all needs probably would be a bigger bite. And yes, we can certainly use a contractor to help that. I just don't know that when we're talking about that kind of scope that could happen before an EIC version 2.0. With enough structure to be able to support that large a dollar contract.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it is, we're looking at a 2.0 piece of it. It is very big and complicated. It will take time.
Thank you. Okay, so we are 2 minutes before the end of the hour. I think we've accomplished a lot. We've got a good process in place. I'm going to ask that we suspend our other meetings that we have for our subgroups for now. And I'm just going to say for about the next 2 weeks, if there are any still on the books, and that we come together, if possible, next week or the week after as a large group and complete the rest of this. In the meantime, I'm going to send this to Cassidy. Cassidy, if you can send this out and we can allow people to start entering these merge of columns, give us their opinion as to who does what and what is not necessary. Pay particular attention to Twitter and newsletters because I think this is really important, and pay particular attention to the remainder of the boxes for podcast, but also look to the bottom. Are there vehicles now, as we have gone through this exercise, that are missing? Is there something else we need to go to? And we'll lean heavily on our partners in the social media group to help us with this. So any other questions?
Well, I will get a doodle poll out to the entire group today to see if we can't find a time for next week. So this is going to be a pretty quick turnaround, so I will get it out ASAP, and if we can get that feedback as quickly as possible, that would be fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
For you.